Chapter 1346. Faltering Starfiend feasted on the corpses of the drowned outcasts with delight. The sight of the metallic devil gorging himself on the dead abominations was a bit gruesome, but mercifully swift. The bodies disappeared into the shadows, incinerating Maw as if they had never existed. Before too long, the deck was clear once again. Where does all this meat even go? This time, the infernal ogre had not gained any new attributes or abilities, which was an expected result. If the scavengers were capable of attaining new powers from each creature they devoured, Sunny would have never survived the battle with the original ravenous fiend. It had to be a rare occurrence, especially now that the Shadow's main attributes were set. It did seem like he had grown a little bit stronger, though, just as the other shadows did when absorbing a fragment. Throwing a dubious glance at the satisfied devil, Sunny shook his head and commanded the glutton to go find a mop. While Fiend was washing the blood off the deck, Sunny and Nephi's briefly examined the ship and then gathered at the stern to divide the soul shards. Let's just each take half. He looked at the small pile of shimmering crystals, calmly thinking about how to use them best. All of the shards were transcendent, considering how nonchalant he was about this unimaginable treasure trove. Remembering the awe they had felt when witnessing a pair of transcendent soul shards back on the Forgotten Shore felt both amusing and nostalgic. Nephi simply shook her head. I'll take a quarter. Your shadows killed twice as many as I did while you dealt with the Depth Dweller. That should be fair. Sunny glanced at her, hesitating. She was right. Out of the two of them, he had contributed much more to the victory. That only went to show how powerful he had grown, armed with a developed aspect legacy and 3 powerful shadows. It also meant that Nephi's needed to catch up as soon as possible. And yet, 3/4 of their spoils amounted to 17 transcendent soul shards. If made into a memory and fed to Nightmare, each would give him 4 shadow fragments. That meant that the Black Stallion would be most of the way to Ascension by the time Sunny finished weaving all these memories, while Nephi's was still far away from becoming a Titan. Strategically, strengthening Nightmare first made more sense. Sunny nodded. All right. Illuminated by the soft glimmer of the soul shards, Neph's face seemed even more reserved than usual. Was she pondering the matter of her faltering progress as well? With a sigh, Nephi's took her share of the soul shards and methodically crushed them one after another, absorbing the streams of ethereal light. Then she rose and said, her tone flat. We've wasted enough time here already. I'll go back to the steering oar. He watched her walk into the runic circle with a complicated expression. Is she still feeling uncertain of herself after the second nightmare? She has been strangely mild ever since coming back. Selfishly, I like this Nephi's more. But he also missed the version of Nephi's that was like an uncompromising flame. A flame that burned with enough passion and unreasonable resolve to burn down the entire world. Sunny shook his head slightly and gathered the rest of the soul shards. She is still the same. When the time comes, she'll burn brighter than the 7 suns combined. I just hope that I won't be burned with the rest of this cursed tomb when that happens. Not entirely convinced, he stored the shards in the covetous coffer and went back to peering into the complexities of spellweaves. The chain breaker continued sailing downstream. In the next week, it was attacked several more times, for better or worse, by solitary nightmare creatures instead of groups like the drowned outcasts had been. Sunny and Nephi's dealt with the grotesque depth dwellers with some effort, but not too much effort. Apart from a few shallow wounds, the biggest hurdle they faced was removing the corpse of an especially large creature from the ram of the ship, which had impaled the abomination after a purposeful and violent collision. None of the nightmare creatures were as powerful as the harrowing foes they had faced in the far reaches of the future. On the positive side, Sunny and Nephi's were alive. On the negative side, They had not been able to salvage as many soul shards as they had after the first attack. Sonny didn't really mind. His time was divided between studying the weave of Anank's mantle and concocting a tentative plan for altering the Dawn Shard. At the same time, he was creating memories from the shards in his possession. That last task was moving along slowly, since it took him roughly a whole day to weave one. That pace was only possible because his reserves of essence were fully restored each dawn and dusk thanks to the crown of twilight. Still, by the end of the week, Nightmare had absorbed 28 shadow fragments, bringing the counter to 229,300. Sonny still had enough soul shards to create 10 rudimentary transcendent memories, each equivalent to 4 fragments. If nothing went wrong, the counter would reach 269/300 in 10 days. His loyal steed's ascension was drawing close. By the end of the week, he felt ready to attempt modifying the Dawn Shard. However, because of how important that endeavor was to the conquest of the third nightmare, Sonny decided to go over everything he had learned and envisioned a few more times. Putting the crown of dawn away and dismissing the shadow hands, he leaned against the side of the ketch and closed his eyes. I've created a sufficient length of essence thread. I've studied the spellweave of the Dawn Shard extensively. I compared the structure of the pattern surrounding the nexus with all the other memories I possess. I've grown accustomed to weaving with 6 hands. He spent 2 days meditating on his plans and mentally going over everything that could go wrong. Finally, just before dawn of the third day, Sonny opened his eyes and manifested 4 shadow arms once again. It's time to begin. The hypnotizing tapestry of the spellweave stretched in the darkness in front of him. Countless threads of ethereal light intertwined in a beautiful but seemingly chaotic pattern centered around a radiant nexus. There had been a time when these patterns were a complete mystery to Sonny, but although they still remained mystifying and nebulous, he could discern an elegant underlying structure to their dazzling, dizzying arrays now. He could also feel the purpose of various elements of the weave more clearly. The spellweave of the Dawn Shard was not the most complex he had ever seen, but it was more complex than most. Even after isolating the rudimentary enchantments that all memories possessed and the special properties shared by shard memories, the remaining expanse of ethereal strings was Byzantine and daunting. Luckily, his goal was not to recreate the weave from scratch. He also did not intend to alter its function, only its capacity and resilience, as well as transplanting a new, much more potent nexus than the existing one. With a sigh, Sonny summoned the covetous coffer and produced a large, shining crystal from within it. When put together, the band of bright metal and the supreme soul shard he had harvested from the guts of the black turtle looked comical. The soul shard was much larger than the crown of dawn, yet it was supposed to become encompassed by it. But that was not an obstacle. Weaves did not exist in the physical sense anyway. Just like souls, they inhabited an entirely different plane of existence. Sonny pulled on the invisible thread of shadow essence. At the same time, a needle that shone with a faint golden glow appeared in one of his hands. He took a deep breath. Steady. The process had to be steady, but it couldn't be slow. Sonny would have to remove the original nexus first before transplanting a new one. The moment it was removed, the weave was going to start falling apart. So, he had to tie as many of the most important threads back fast, and then bring the rest back even faster. He had spent years learning sorcery and 2 weeks restlessly preparing for this moment, but the outcome was going to be decided in less than 10 minutes. If Sonny succeeded, the cohort would acquire a powerful tool to help them survive the nightmare. If he failed, the Dawn Shard would be destroyed, and he would have to explain himself to one hell of an angry changing star. She probably won't kill me, right, but just in case I'd better not fail. Of course you will. When have you ever not failed? The Sin of Solace was observing the process with a disdainful expression. Sonny was concentrating on the task so much that he had lowered his guard. As a result, the hurtful remark actually cut, for once. Well, to be honest, they always cut a little, but this time he felt bitter anger swell in his chest. Calm down. Throwing a dark look at the grinning apparition, Sonny wrapped all 5 shadows around himself and summoned the crown of twilight. As the first ray of sunshine burst from the horizon, he took a deep breath and thrust one of his shadow hands into the ethereal tapestry of the spellweave. His clawed fingers wrapped themselves around the shining nexus, and then crushed it, destroying the anchor of the countless threads. I wonder how anyone could have been a weaver before me. Sonny was more or less certain that the very ability to not only see, but also touch the ethereal strings was granted to him by Bone Weave. His eyes had been altered by consuming a drop of Weaver's blood, while his fingers had been altered by swallowing the alabaster phalanx of the Demon of Fate. On the surface, the alteration simply made them more sensitive. But he felt that it went much deeper than that. Who knew, maybe he would be able to caress the strings of fate itself one day. Before the radiant weave could fully fall apart, his other hand placed the Supreme Soul Shard in its center. The one that had crushed the original nexus was already retreating, catching the most important thread as it did. 3 more hands flashed forward, doing the same. The last hand, his left human hand, was the most important, since it held Weaver's needle. All the rest were meant to stall the deterioration of the weave, but it was meant to actually mend the damage. Threading the first ethereal string into the radiant needle, Sonny connected it to the nexus. Then another and another. Faster. 5 of his hands danced, manipulating the dying weave into following their will, holding it from crumbling and pulling it back from the verge of collapse. At the precise moment when the new nexus became connected to enough strings to hold it in place, the 6th joined them. What madness made me think that having only 5 fingers is enough? Damnation! I should have learned to have more. Time seemed to have slowed down. Sonny felt the same rush of adrenaline he did during furious battles. His perception subtly changed, turning the world stark and clear. Golden sparks glimmered in the depths of his dark eyes. For a few moments, everything was in a fragile balance. One wrong move, one slightest mistake, and the weave would have reached the point of no return. But Sonny did not make any mistakes. He performed every movement flawlessly, focused to such a degree that all his senses except sight and the tactile feeling of intangible threads sliding through his fingers disappeared. Finally, after something that felt both like a second and an eternity, that moment of fragility passed. The main structure of the weave had been connected to the new nexus, ensuring its stability. Good. As Sonny's hands continued to tie the few last threads to the shining ember, his mind already wandered to the next task. The first step of the alteration had been completed, but the result was still uncertain. The next stage was going to decide whether he would succeed or not, and while it gave him more leeway, it was no less difficult. Now that a Supreme Soul Shard replaced the original nexus of the spellweave, the powerful energy contained within it flowed into the radiant tapestry. The ethereal threads shone much brighter, reinforced by their own enchantment. Most of them held. But some of the more delicate patterns started to glow too intensely, as if a moment away from catching on fire and dissipating into blinding light. He had to reinforce these sections of the weave, and do it in a way that did not contradict the intricate patterns. Threading a string of shadow essence into Weaver's needle, he held himself back from hurrying too much, and started to weave new patterns, these ones black and lightless, on top and through the radiant ones. The needle worked in the most pressing areas of the weave, while his other hands tackled less critical points. No matter how nimble his fingers were, he still couldn't weave as fast without a proper tool. The reverse effect of his unique ability to touch the ethereal strings was that they were sharper than any sword could ever be, and were thus capable of cutting his flesh without any effort. Losing a finger was as easy as applying the slightly wrong amount of pressure, or missing the mark by a hair's breadth. That said, while his own fingers were indispensable, those of the shadow hands could be easily sacrificed. They weren't just as responsive as the real ones, but the fact that one or two could be lost with no consequence made up for the fact. Ouch! No matter how careful Sonny was, the dire need to move fast was bound to cause him some pain. A thin cut appeared on his right thumb, swelling with blood. Luckily, no drop of it fell into the weave to disturb its delicate equilibrium. His blood was tenacious, after all, and knew how to stay inside his body. Most of the time. The shadow hands were faring worse. By the time Sonny put out the most dangerous fires, they were utterly shredded. He was barely keeping the wounded shadows from dissipating back into intangible forms, and had even been forced to dismiss one of the arms and create an entirely new one on the fly. Nevertheless, it felt like he was past the most dangerous part. A shaky breath escaped from Sonny's lips, and a drop of sweat fell from his forehead onto the wooden deck. Without allowing himself to relax, he froze for a split second, gazing at the entirety of the weave. The nexus is holding. There and there. The shadow strings are lessening the burden on the original ones just as planned. That area is a bit frayed. I need to reinforce it more, no, not more. Better, those areas, though, looked fine at the start, but are starting to worry me now. Calming his wildly beating heart, he resumed his work. Now, Sonny moved at a less breakneck pace, but was more methodical in his approach. Good, it's all coming together. It was a wonderful feeling. The collapsing weave had struggled against his attempts to save it at first, to the point that he felt like 3 critical problems appeared for each one he fixed. The more he repaired and reinforced it, though, the more it felt like the weave was assisting him. The ethereal tapestry was starting to look elegant once again. The radiant threads and the lightless ones intertwined in a beautiful harmony. Both were being strengthened by the enchantment of the dawn shard and strengthening each other at the same time. A feeling of wondrous harmony permeated the intricate spellweave. Its nexus was replaced, and its pattern was invaded by countless new threads, all of them dark and ghostly. But nevertheless, it was resembling a different but natural version of itself, more and more. Continuing his meticulous work, Sonny threw a brief glance at the Sin of Solace. "Hey, you!" The sword wraith raised an eyebrow. "Hey yourself, fool." Sonny was already looking back at the weave, concentrating on finishing the alteration, but the corner of his mouth rose in a small, vindictive smile. "Go drown yourself in the river, you insufferable wretch. Weren't you endlessly going on about how I would inevitably fail? Well, did I? Who's the fool now, huh?" At that moment, he grinned and abruptly lowered all 6 of his hands, then froze, staring intently at the bond of bright metal laying on the deck in front of him. His work was done. The alteration had been finished. Sonny took a deep breath, and as he did, the spell whispered into his ear. "Your memory has been destroyed." His eyes widened. His hands twitched. "Ho!" Before the shock could even register in his mind, the spell spoke once more. "You have received a supreme memory, Crown of Dawn." And W. Sonny remained frozen for a few moments, then slumped against the side of the ketch. An infuriating growl escaped from his lips. What the hell was that? Are you trying to give me a heart attack, you damn spell? Think before you speak, damn it." The spell did not answer. Perhaps for the better. After calming down a little, Sonny dismissed the shadow arms and picked up the Crown of Dawn from the deck. His hands were trembling slightly. The eastern horizon was already painted lilac by the rising suns. Looking at the memory he had altered with burning eyes, he lingered for a while, and then said tiredly, "So your name actually changed to the Crown of Dawn. Ah, how fitting." Before, that had simply been what they called the Dawn Shard, the shard memory of the first lord of the Bright Castle. But it seemed that the spell decided that the alteration he had performed was significant enough to warrant a new name for the newly elevated memory. Was he mistaken, or had the single gemstone adorning the austere band of metal become brighter? Enjoying the view of the bright gem, Sunny inhaled deeply and summoned the runes. The runes read: Memory Crown of Dawn. Memory rank, Supreme. Sunny remained motionless for a while, looking at the string of shimmering runes. A sense of profound relief and exhilaration washed over him. He suddenly felt refreshed and invigorated, as if his fatigue had receded a little, his mind clearing. No, not suddenly. Touching the smooth silk of the Shroud of Dusk, Sunny belatedly realized that it was already being augmented by the passive enchantment of the empowered Crown of Dawn. It's working. He closed his eyes for a moment, then took a look at the rest of the runes describing the band of bright metal. They were the same as before, only the rank of the memory had changed. Sunny had expected that. In fact, anything else would have been a cause for concern. The goal of the alteration was to strengthen the existing enchantment, after all, not change it. The Crown of Dawn would still be able to enhance all memories in a large area around it, with no limit to their number. It was just that the augmentation it provided had become much more potent. Most miraculous of all, that enchantment somehow remained a passive one. His eyes gleamed darkly. I think, armed with that power, the cohort would be able to challenge enemies far beyond their own level of prowess, which meant that they would have a much higher chance of conquering the nightmare and returning to the waking world alive. Just like they had conquered the Forgotten Shore and returned from its unforgiving expanse alive. He smiled, then dismissed the Crown of Dawn and rose. Heading to the stern of the ship, Sunny tried to contain his emotions. His face remained neutral, with only a faint smile playing on his lips. Soon he saw Nephi's. She threw a glance at him with the same calm expression she usually wore, then asked evenly, "What was the shouting about?" Sunny stumbled. "Right, I did curse the spell out, didn't I?" In hindsight, that was probably not wise. He wouldn't put it past the damn thing to know how to hold a grudge. The descriptions it made of him were already vaguely snide, so Sunny shuddered at the thought of what the next one was going to say. Whatever, that will happen later. Right now, though. Walking over to Nephi's, he shrugged. Oh, it's nothing really. I just got a bit emotional and let the spell have it. Why have you never yelled at the spell? She stared at him dubiously. Can't say that I have. Sunny coughed. Well, anyway, give me your hand. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed it, lingered for a moment, and sent the Crown of Dawn from his soul into hers. Nephi's turned her head slightly and stared into the distance, or rather, it seemed like she did. In truth, she must have been reading the runes. Oh, its name has changed. Then she suddenly froze. Sunny studied her face with rapt attention, registering every minute change. Sadly, Changing Star was not the kind of person to openly show emotions. Nevertheless, he noticed her pupils widening slightly, white sparks igniting in their depths. Ugh. He laughed. You finally noticed its rank, didn't you? Well, 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 no need to praise me too much. I just took the soul shard we scavenged from inside the black turtle and transplanted it into the Dawn Shard, strengthening the weave of its enchantment to withstand the burden of channeling supreme power in the process. That's all. Sunny looked down modestly. I am totally not a peerless genius among peerless geniuses. You absolutely don't need to worship the ground I walk on. There's no ground in the tomb of Ariel anyway. Nephi's suddenly gripped his hand tightly and pierced him with a burning gaze. Sunny, you can elevate memories to higher ranks now. He smiled, enjoying the intensity of her reaction. However, his smile dimmed a little bit the next moment. Well, yes, but also no. Sunny sighed. The case of the Crown of Dawn is unique, because it possesses an enchantment that enhances itself. That is why I was able to outfit it with a Supreme Soul Shard and elevate its power by 2 whole ranks. For other memories, I doubt that they'll endure such a significant alteration. Elevating them by 1 rank, though, that should be possible for some, I think, if time-consuming. Nephi stared at him in silence. He hesitated for a few moments, then said in a somewhat stifled tone, "But She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Yes." Sonny coughed. "Can you let go of my hand? You're sort of crushing it." Nephi's looked down, blinked a couple of times, then hurriedly released her grip. "Oh." Sonny shook his hand in the air. It didn't really hurt, but he had suddenly become painfully aware of how close they were standing. His face felt hot. Letting out an awkward chuckle, he shook his head and pointed to her head. "Now summon that thing. I came here right away, so I don't even know how powerful exactly it has become." Nephi's nodded, and a whirlwind of radiant sparks appeared around her. Soon, a band of bright metal manifested itself from thin air, its single gem glistening in the light of the rising suns. "Let's do this." For the next half an hour, Sonny and Nephi's were engrossed in testing the effects of the Crown of Dawn on their memories. The results went beyond his wildest imagination. Sonny had thought that his makeshift alteration would cause a loss of potential, resulting in a memory that was a supreme one in name, but not in power. And there was some loss, inevitably, but so little that it could almost be disregarded. Before, the Dawn Shard had been capable of elevating the power of awakened memories to resemble that of ascended ones. It had also been capable of providing a significant boost to ascended memories, and a slight one to transcendent ones. The meaning of power in this context was an elusive one. The augmentation did not only empower the enchantments of the enhanced memories, but also the quality of the memories themselves. Swords would become sharper, armor would become more durable. There was also something else at play. The intangible, mystical quality that made magical materials different from the mundane ones was enhanced, as well, which was why the dreamers of the Dark City had been able to harm and slay enemies of higher ranks with their awakened weapons. The Crown of Dawn functioned in a similar fashion to its predecessor. However, its augmentation was much more powerful. An average awakened weapon was elevated to the level of a peak ascended one, while the most powerful awakened weapons could almost reach the realm of transcendence. Ascended memories were elevated to the level of transcendent ones. While transcendent memories. Sonny grew still, peering into the depths of the Sin of Solace. Under his gaze, the weave of the jade giant shone with blinding brilliance. "It's not that different from the Crown of Twilight. It is like a supreme weapon." He threw a glance at the silent apparition that stood a few steps away, wearing a somber expression, and suddenly felt a pang of apprehension. Dismissing the Sin of Solace, Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then finally took the Crown of Twilight off his head and studied it. It was benefiting from being in the presence of the Crown of Dawn, as well. The boost was not as striking as it was for the memories of lesser ranks, but still tangible. Nephi's, meanwhile, was holding her longsword with a hard-to-read expression. Suddenly, though, her beautiful face was illuminated by a radiant smile. "Sonny, this is amazing. With this we can." She stumbled over her words, not knowing what to say. Enjoying the rare sight of her smiling brightly, he nodded and looked in the direction where the current was pulling them. His own smile grew a little cold. "Yes." Sonny gritted his teeth. "We can slaughter them all." The winds filled the sails of the chain breaker, pushing it forward. The past awaited. By the time Sonny had finished the alteration of the Dawn Shard, they were not that far away from fallen grace. Neither he nor Nephi's knew the exact distance they had to traverse to find the last city of the Sibyls, but the navigation tools Anak had left them pointed to its approach. Fallen Grace was situated in the western reaches of the great river, where the sky was almost always painted crimson by the setting sun. As the chain breaker sailed deeper into the past, it was also leaving behind the pure light of day. Gradually, the color of the sky above their heads changed, from vibrant azure to breathtaking magenta, and finally to the blood-red blaze of perpetual sunset. It was like sailing into a sea of blood. Sunny stared at the burning sky, awed by its fiery beauty and its ominous dread. That's not concerning at all. Why would the Sibyls build one of their cities in such a darkly beautiful but sinister place? Surely, living in the warm sunlight of the central region of the great river would have been much more pleasant. Shaking his head, he returned to the shade of the sacred tree and sat down, resting his back against its white bark. He had just finished weaving another memory for Nightmare, and was not in the mood to start on the next one just yet. His study of the spellweave of Anak's mantle had also been producing fewer and fewer results. It would never stop being useful to him as a learning tool, but Sonny felt like he was nearing a dead end. He would need to gain more skill as a weaver before looking to the nebulous mantle for more lessons. So what else was there to do? Feeling restless, he summoned the estuary key out of habit. Staring into the weave of the mysterious memory had become like a ritual by now. Even though Sonny could not understand anything about it, the process itself was calming. However, he had not taken a glance at the key since before attempting the alteration of the Crown of Dawn. Who knew? Maybe passing such an important milestone on his path to becoming a proper sorcerer would change something. "Are you playing with our favorite toy again? Why don't you toss it overboard and be done with it?" The sword wraith stared at him disdainfully from the shadows of the tree. Not paying the apparition any attention, Sonny held up the jagged black stone and peered into its weathered surface. The inconceivable weave of ghostly strings was as unattainable as ever. He studied its dark tapestry, following the twists and turns of the black threads, like he had done 100 times before. What a disappointment! I still can't even start to unravel its mysteries. Among all the odd things Sonny had seen and faced in the nightmare, the estuary key was perhaps the most bizarre. He still had no idea how this supreme memory of the sixth tier had ended up in his soul's sea, or what it was supposed to do. However, after spending countless hours staring at the staggering weave of ghostly strings, he had gained a vague, tentative feeling about it. Sonny was mostly confident that the single, passive enchantment of the estuary key had two distinct effects. He did not know what these effects were, but felt that one was directed outward, while the other was directed inward, affecting the black stone itself in some manner. The latter was also much more vast and potent than the former. It was unusual that a memory of the sixth tier only possessed a single enchantment. Since it did, that enchantment had to be a powerful one, and most of that power went into ensuring the function of the inward effect. Maybe that's why I wasn't able to discern what exactly the enchantment does. It's only affecting the estuary key itself. Perhaps it was an enchantment that teleported the strange memory into the souls of unsuspecting awakened without their consent. As Sonny was feeling amused with this theory, his gaze suddenly caught on a minuscule part of the inconceivable weave. The lightless tapestry was vast enough that he might have never seen it before, or if he had, Sonny had not paid it any attention. But now he froze, staring at the inconspicuous pattern. What the hell is that? The pattern looked familiar. Sonny had definitely seen it before somewhere else, recently. Which was not that strange in and of itself. The estuary key was a memory, after all, and as such, it shared many small parts of its weave with all other memories. The patterns that created the rudimentary enchantments, like the ability to be summoned and dismissed, repair itself, and so on. However, Sonny knew these patterns by heart. He had woven them from scratch many times after all, and this one was not one of them. Where have I seen it? The complicated array of ghostly strings had a certain unique structure to it, which was different from the rest of the spellweave. He recognized its nature after a moment of contemplation. Patterns like these were rare, but present in every memory. It was how runes were expressed through essence strings. Both the runic sorcery and shaping were based on true names, one etching them through a written language, the other invoking them directly. However, weaving was different. It did not rely on words to create enchantments. That said, there was still a place for words in a spell weave, and therefore for the runes inscribing them. These runes, translated from the corresponding string patterns, express the name of the memory, its description, and the true name of its master, if the master possessed one. The problem was that Sonny had long identified the patterns that inscribed the name and description of the estuary key, as well as his own true name, and this particular pattern had nothing to do with them. Why were there additional runes hidden in the weave of the black stone? And why did the pattern of essence strings describing these runes look so familiar? Sonny leaned forward with a frown and concentrated, trying to decipher the meaning of the pattern. It was not at all difficult, in fact. It was even easier than usual, as if he had read this exact pattern of essence strings many times before. His pupils narrowed. Sin of... Sonny suddenly straightened, a cold shiver running down his spine. Standing in the shadows, the apparition yawned and covered his mouth with a hand. What's the matter? Solace. The sin of Solace. Written in ghostly strings, the name of his cursed sword, and the sword wraith born from its curse, was meticulously woven into the enchantment of the estuary key sin of Solace. These words were clearly a part of the ghostly spellweave of the estuary key. Sonny stared at them intently, feeling a strange mix of confusion, curiosity, and dread. What the hell was the meaning of this? Shifting slightly, he looked at the sword wraith. The apparition stood in the shadows, wearing a bored and resentful expression. Sonny had grown so accustomed to the company of the sin of Solace, first in the form of a disembodied voice, then of a vague figure, and finally of a perfect reflection of himself, that he rarely paid it much attention these days. But the sword wraith was not at all benevolent or harmless. In fact, he was a sinister and insidious being, spawned from the whisper of a fearsome demon and meant to drive the wielder of the sword mad. The fact that Sonny still had his sanity intact, or rather, somewhat intact, was only due to his extraordinary mental resilience and resistance to mind attacks. Most humans would have already been turned into raving lunatics by the Jade Giant. Sonny, though, apart from looking like a madman from time to time due to an outwardly strange habit of talking to himself, he only found the presence of the sin of Solace frustrating, nothing more. Is there more to this damned curse? He knew that the apparition would never give an honest answer, but nevertheless asked. There's no reason your name would be etched into the weave of the estuary key, is there? The sword wraith gave him a disdainful look. I don't know, maybe there is, you're the great sorcerer, so you tell me. Sonny took a deep breath. You are keeping a lot of secrets these days, huh? Makes me wonder if I should just feed you to nightmare. Better safe than sorry, that is what they say. The sin of Solace laughed. Go ahead, get rid of your most powerful offensive memory. Why not? You're going to die in this nightmare anyway. In fact, I encourage you to destroy me. Oh, do you think that I want to be here? Gods, no. He grinned. Ah, but there's a problem. Are you sure that destroying the sword will get rid of me? It might, but then again, maybe it won't. Maybe the damage to your mind has already been done, and we are stuck together for the rest of your short, distasteful, pitiful life. What a cruel fate. Sonny gritted his teeth. Indeed, he couldn't afford to destroy the sin of solace, and neither was he certain that doing so would banish the apparition. They were truly stuck with each other, at least for now. And I won't get any information out of the bastard either. So there were only two ways to solve the mystery of the estuary key and its connection to the sin of solace. One was to find the great sorcerer who had created the ominous memory. The other was to deduce the truth somehow. Sonny looked away with a somber expression. Now that I know that the sin of solace has something to do with the estuary key. He suddenly felt cold. After entering the nightmare and discovering that he had somehow come into possession of a supreme memory, Sonny made several theories about how it could have ended up in his soul sea. One of them was that the soul serpent had slain a great nightmare creature out there in the real world. The other was that it was Sonny himself who had created the estuary key far in the future, but somehow received it in the present due to the strange nature of the great river. And now that he had learned certain facts, and knew that the name of the sin of solace was etched into the weave of the unexplainable memory, a chilling suspicion was getting harder and harder to deny. Looking down, Sonny slowly clenched his fists. It was him, the Mad Prince. He must be the one who created the estuary key. Simply thinking these words made him shudder. But it was just too compelling of a theory to discard. Sonny had suspected that the mysterious memory had been created by a future version of himself. He also suspected that the Mad Prince was one of his possible futures. So, wouldn't it be logical to assume that the future version of himself who had created the estuary key was the Mad Prince? The name of the sin of solace etched into the weave, the ghostly strings of shadow essence, the unexplainable nature of the key, and the strange words describing it. The answer is oblivion. It had to have been him. How many weavers were there who could create threads out of shadow essence? Sonny was certain of it. Then what exactly did it mean? If that abomination really created the estuary key, did it prove that Sonny was really inhabiting the body of one of the 6 plagues? That would certainly make things easier for the cohort. One adversary was already gone, after all, and it didn't even have to be just one. What if each of the members of the cohort had been sent into the bodies of these powerful defiled? Actually, that was a chilling thought, because while it would really be wonderful to not have to deal with the 6 plagues, it also meant that the other members had been sent directly to the heart of the defilement, the city of Verge. The Mad Prince was the only one of the defiled champions who had traveled into the far reaches of the future after all, from what Sonny knew. Surely, the nightmare spell wouldn't have been so unjust in setting up its trial. Still, if Sonny had indeed taken the role of the abomination from the future, he could also tentatively explain the sudden change of the sin of solace. Why had the sword wraith suddenly grown to look so vivid and real at the start of the nightmare, almost indistinguishable from the real thing? Was it perhaps because Sonny had actually inherited not one but 2 things from the Mad Prince? One was the estuary key, while the other was the sin of solace. What if the sword wraith that had greeted him in the nightmare came from the future, just like the estuary key? What if the sin of solace had been by his side all the way to becoming defiled, and then spending God's knew how much time haunting the great river? Hundreds of years, at least, judging by how superior the madman's weaving was to Sonny's own, and had been then passed down to the younger version of its corrupted master through some bizarre anomaly or dark scheme. The apparition had let it slip that he knew the Mad Prince by interfering with the dream where the abomination's vestige showed up. Was that why? Sonny scowled. Suddenly, the idea of feeding the jade sword to his shadows did not seem so crazy anymore. I'll wait and see. Sonny glared at the sin of solace, distrustful and wary. Glaring at him back, the sword wraith grinned. Look at you figuring things out. Ah, there's really no sight more comical than a fool who thinks that he's smart. Wouldn't you agree? Sonny grimaced and remained silent. Was that a confirmation, or simple mockery? He gritted his teeth, knowing that there was no way to tell. In the end, Sonny failed to get the wraith to say anything informative. Just as usual, all the answers he received were either vague and misleading, or outright insults that had nothing to do with the question. Later, in a somber mood, he left the shadow of the sacred tree and walked around the ship, examining its state. Sonny felt odd in light of the things he had learned and suspected to be true. It's infuriating. He seemed to have stumbled on the truth, or rather, on a big chunk of the truth. However, there were still plenty of missing parts, and those were the parts that contained the most important answers. His mind was spinning, coming up with one baseless theory after another. Sonny was unable to glean the true meaning of it all, but what he did manage to do was completely exhaust himself mentally. Eventually, feeling foul, he threw the manic desire to get to the bottom of things right here and now out of his head, and settled near the ketch to start weaving another memory for nightmare. The fiery sunset lasted for the entirety of the day, and was then replaced by the ghostly radiance of the night. Here in the western reaches of the great river, even the opalescence of the water was different. It was shifting between deep carmine, vibrant crimson, and rich maroon, as if they were truly sailing on a river of blood. The nights they had witnessed before were dreamlike, but this one was like a scene from a darkly beautiful nightmare. Sonny and Nephi's had not slept for a single moment, too wary to close their eyes. In the morning, the impenetrable darkness of the night was once again replaced by a blazing sunset. It seemed like one of the 7 suns was always within reach, drowning in the currents of time. The further west they sailed, the dimmer the light became. Eventually, they were surrounded by a fiery dusk. "Sonny, isn't the current strange?" Neff's voice sounded tense. Currently, he was holding the steering oar, while she was leaning over the railing nearby. Confused, Sonny sent one of his shadows to take a look overboard. It took him a long time to understand what had alarmed Nephi's. Strange. The current of the great river was changing. Ever since they entered the tomb of Ariel, it had always flowed in the same direction. But now, it seemed as if the currents were twisting, not only carrying the chain breaker forward, but also slightly pulling it to the side, in the direction of the setting sun. He gripped the oar tighter. We must be nearing the edge. The great river was vast and flowed endlessly, but it was not limitless. That was one of the first things they had asked Anik, hoping that there was a shore somewhere in this inhospitable world. But there was no shore. Instead, the great river was limited from west and east, from dusk and dawn, as the river people called these directions, by a bottomless dark abyss. It was as though the river flowed through nothing, suspended in the void by the power of the demon of dread. And so, there was an edge instead of the shore, a colossal and unceasing waterfall where the waters of time spilled into the abyss and disappeared into the boundless darkness. Sailing close to the edge was tantamount to suicide. They had not reached the truly dangerous waters yet. Otherwise, the currents would have already been pulling the chain breaker toward the abyss with ferocious force. But the subtle change in the direction of where the water flowed indicated that the edge was already not too far away. Which was good news, because it meant that they were even closer to fallen grace. And dusk, the last sibyl of the estuary. Sonny inhaled deeply. Check the navigation tools again. It would be really awful if we overshoot fallen grace and end up deeper into the past than intended. That would have been bad indeed, considering that there was no one except defiled further downstream than the last human city. If the last human city was still standing. Sonny frowned, remembering the time storm. They did not really know how long they had spent fighting against its rage, and especially how long they had spent in the eerily tranquil eye of the roving cataclysm, trying their hardest not to look at the water. Who knew? fallen grace might have been consumed by the defilement already. Even if it wasn't, there was no telling whether Dusk was friend or foe, let alone whether she was the one who had sent Anik the message to find them through the dreams. They had to be ready for battle. While Nephi's was trying to determine their location with the help of the navigation tools, Sunny silently gave his shadows a series of commands. Standing at the bow of the graceful ship, Saint released her darkness with indifferent poise. Nightmare stirred in the shadows, his crimson eyes igniting with dangerous light. Fiend rose from the deck, infernal flames burning behind the black faceplate of his fearsome helmet. Soon, Nephi's put the tools away and looked downstream. Everything seems fine. We should be very near, of course. The city might have migrated in any direction by now. Still, it couldn't have moved far without sacrificing its entire population of riverborn. Sunny nodded slowly. Indeed, although the floating cities of the Great River civilization could theoretically travel as far as their inhabitants wished, in reality, they were bound in place by the lifespans of the riverborn. Migrations happened over the span of generations, not months or years. Replace me at the oar. Nephi silently stepped into the runic circle, freeing Sunny. Right now, he was a more efficient fighter between the two of them. More importantly, he had no idea how to berth a ship. If the people of Fallen Grace were indeed friendly, it would be really embarrassing to crash into their pier first thing after arriving. Yeah, I'll handle the fighting if it comes to that. Sunny secretly looked around, checking what the Sin of Solace was doing. Making sure that the sword wraith wasn't up to no good, he let out a mental sigh of relief and extended his shadow sense as far as he could. After that, all they could do was wait. An hour passed in tense silence, then another. The drag of the abyss was still mild, but it was slowly growing faster. Surrounded by eternal sunset, Sunny found it hard to measure time. The chain breaker sailed through crimson dusk. The waters of the great river reflected the burning sky and seemed to be engulfed in flames themselves in turn. Then finally, Saint shifted and slightly turned her head. In the distance, Sunny saw a spark of light shining above the horizon. Somewhere out there, a white flame was burning at the top of a tall lighthouse. They had found the last human city in the tomb of Ariel, it seemed. After months of wandering the perilous expanse of the tomb of Ariel, they had reached Fallen Grace. There had been a time when Kronos possessed a youthful body and an even younger soul. His soul was still young, all things considered, but his body had turned decrepit and frail. It was full of aches, felt stiff in the mornings, and had to be handled with care. Still, there were pleasant things about being old as well. Kronos had burned with all kinds of hopes and desires when he was young, but now that he was in his twilight years, life was calm and peaceful. Or rather, his feelings about life were calm and peaceful, or was it one and the same? Since one thing he didn't possess was the actual wisdom of old age, it was hard to say. One thing was for certain, not having to worry about the future. He had much more time to enjoy the trivial delights of life. Like the warmth of his cot, the companionship of his friends and neighbors, or the beauty of the world. Since Kronos did not sleep much, old as his body was, he had developed the habit of walking to the piers at the break of day to watch the suns rise from the water. Today, just like always, he left his home carrying a lantern and walked to the edges of the city. Despite the fact that the streets were still dark, there were many early risers just like him out and about. Some greeted him with words, some with smiles. Their faces were just as wrinkly as his, and their bodies were just as stiff as his. That also made being old feel less lonely. Eventually, Kronos crossed a few rope bridges and reached the piers. Several people were already there, waiting in the darkness. Some of them he knew from his days in the House of Youth, some he had met after. Joining them, he extinguished the lantern, sat down, and looked at the water. They chatted as the night lived its last minutes. Shrouded in darkness, The great river glowed with a beautiful red radiance. Then, slowly, its light grew brighter. The chatter quieted down as the old men and women enjoyed the view of the flowing water. Somewhere far away, the black veil covering the sky rippled. Hints of lilac and azure were mixed into its dark expanse. The river seemed to ignite, fiery colors spreading across its surface. Then, finally, the suns rose from the depths, painting the world in a million shades of scarlet. Reflected in the water, their light was like a spreading flame. Kronos sighed lightly. It's a new day. A cool breeze caressed their faces, and the world was at peace. Or maybe it just seemed to be at peace. Of course, it was actually at war, but they did not have to worry about that today. Otherwise, the lady would have already warned the warriors of the city to prepare for battle. The group of old folks remained on the pier for a while, not in a hurry to leave. There was gossip to share and idle conversations to be had. As the youngest of the bunch, Kronos had not grown tired of hearing the same old stories over and over again yet, so he received a lot of attention. He listened and laughed, feeling a comfortable bliss. But then, a note of confusion entered that bliss. Still engrossed in a story told by an old woman who had left the house of youth a few years before the rest of them fled, he glanced at the river and froze, stunned. There was a black spot on the horizon. It was a ship moving in the direction of fallen grace. Kronos trembled slightly. A ship, but it's not time yet for the fishermen to return. Has something bad happened? Soon the other old folks noticed the approaching vessel as well. The conversation died down, and all of them stared into the distance, somber and tense. Then their expressions changed. The mysterious vessel had drawn close enough for them to discern a few details. Its size, the color of its hull and sails, the strange shape of its mast. Kronos was suddenly gripped with fear. It's not. The vessel had a graceful silhouette, but looked indescribably menacing as it emerged from the crimson glow of dusk. Its hull was battered and covered in scars, while its tattered sails were like an ill omen. Much more importantly, the ghostly ship was unfamiliar. It was unmistakably alien to their city and its fleet of fishing boats, all of which Kronos knew by heart. He had never seen an unfamiliar ship arrive at Fallen Grace. They had received guests in the past, when his parents were young, but that time had long passed. Because Fallen Grace was the last human city on the great river. Defiled. Someone's yell broke the silence, sending the old folks reeling. The Defiled did not have a habit of traversing the great river on ships, but they were also sinister and unpredictable. The ominous ship might very well belong to the abominable monsters. But if it did, why had the lady not warned them of an approaching attack? Why was the light burning at the top of her palace still white? Icy dread grasped Kronos. Has the lady succumbed? No, impossible. His irreverent thoughts were interrupted by a loud scream. The observers staggered back, horrified by a dark shadow that moved below the water. Shocked, Kronos watched as the head of a colossal serpent rose from the waves near the approaching vessel. The beast's scales were onyx black, glistening with dark sanguine glow as they reflected the crimson light of dusk. A corrupted. People of Fallen Grace had all heard legends of the Serpent King as young kids, so seeing a similar abomination rise from the depths was like watching their childhood fears come alive. At that moment, the serpent's lightless eyes turned to the pier. Kronos felt his soul tremble, as if the creature was peering directly at him. And then something unexplainable happened. The colossal body of the monstrous Leviathan suddenly rippled, becoming vague and indistinct. Then it dissipated into a tide of darkness. Instead, a slender human figure appeared on the bow of the approaching ship. The dark figure was contoured against the burning sky, its mantle moving slightly in the wind. It seemed to belong to a young man with porcelain skin and raven-black hair, his eyes as dark as night. The same lightless gaze swept across the pier, and then the sails of the ominous ship lowered themselves, as if by magic. Kronos took a shaky breath, staring at the ghostly vessel. A strange thought appeared in his mind. Is this the end, or a new beginning? With its tattered sails lowered, the ominous vessel slowed down, eventually coming to a semblance of a halt. It drifted on the waves a few hundred meters away from the pier, carried by nothing except the current. Kronos had managed to regain some composure by then. He briefly thought about running away, but decided against it. His body was too old to run with any kind of significant speed, anyway. The watchers guarding the city must have noticed the ghostly ship and the terrifying onyx serpent, too. If the lady had truly not known about their arrival, warriors would already be on their way. For a few moments, everyone remained motionless. The old men and women gathered on the pier, and the dark figure standing on the bow of the graceful vessel, as well. The current was slowly pulling the ship closer. It was only a matter of minutes before it reached the pier. This is strangely exciting. Kronos should have been terrified, but he found himself awed and curious instead. All of them here in fallen grace lived with the knowledge that their lives would soon come to an end. Death was like an old friend, not an odious enemy. The arrival of a mysterious ship, however, was a novelty. How often did he get to experience something entirely unexpected? He had never seen anything like it, and would most likely never get a chance to witness something as wondrous again. So, he waited for the moment when the hull of the ship touched the pier with bated breath. Eventually, the graceful vessel drew close enough for them to see every terrible scar and every burn mark covering its battered hull. It seemed like the battered ship had escaped the depths of hell and survived all kinds of untold disasters. What terrible battles had it endured? What harrowing creatures had clawed its hull, unable to break through? What kind of beings dwelled within it, who had been able to survive all these ordeals? Were they, perhaps, more harrowing than the creatures that had left their marks on the ancient hull? Kronos and his fellows saw the deck of the ship as well, stunned by the sight of a beautiful tree growing around the ship's main mast. That tree was vibrant and full of life, not at all like the grim vessel below it. It was much taller and robust than any tree growing in fallen grace. What is this craftsmanship? Kronos had never seen a vessel of such design, nor had he known of any shipbuilder who could have created it. The lines of the ghostly ship were elegant, but unfamiliar. The small details of its construction were unlike anything that the river people would have built. They were also entirely different from how the Twilight people had built things, back before they were wiped out by the Defiled. The ghostly ship looked ancient and mysterious, like all things passed down from the outsiders. Suddenly, Kronos felt joyous excitement. Are these people? The ship smoothly approached the pier and halted just beside it, its bow softly touching the mooring berth. As the humans of fallen grace watched in stunned silence, 4 figures jumped from its deck onto the weathered wood. There were 2 humans in front, if they were really humans and not deities. Kronos suddenly found it hard to breathe. The first one was the slender young man wearing a dark mantle, his porcelain face drowning in the shadows. His lightless eyes were like 2 pools of unfathomable darkness, cold and piercing. There was a crown of black metal resting on his head, shaped to resemble a twisting serpent. The other was a tall young woman with silver hair and calm gray eyes, wearing a white tunic. Her face was like that of a statue, beautiful and distant. She wore a crown, too, this one bright and adorned with a single radiant gem. When she appeared, it was as though the light of the 7 suns had grown a little brighter. Kronos felt something move in his heart, and for a moment his soul was grasped by a deep and unexplainable longing. The 2 were like night and day, mysterious and beautiful. The other 2 were like monsters. One was a towering knight that seemed to have been carved from onyx, her graceful armor both intricate and fearsome. The other was like an ogre forged from black steel, with hungry flames burning in the depths of his ferocious eyes. There was something hiding in the shadows, too, a dreadful presence that felt both elusive and terrifying. Everyone stared at the strangers, feeling dread, awe, and wonder. After a few moments of silence, the young man wearing the serpent crown took a step forward and spoke in a familiar language, his voice resounding across the pier. "We have come from the far reaches of the future in search of fallen grace, the last bastion of the river people. We mean no harm, unless you do us harm. I am." At that moment, Kronos became sure of his suspicion. They must be. With his heart beating wildly, he stepped forward and asked in a trembling voice, My lord, are you the children of Weaver?" The young man glanced at him, making Kronos shiver under that piercing gaze of his. A hint of surprise appeared in the lightless eyes, but then disappeared, replaced by something that resembled satisfaction. "Indeed, we are changing star and sunless children of Weaver." His words were like an explosion for the old men and women gathered on the pier. Their fear disappeared, and instead, bright smiles illuminated their wrinkly faces. "Of course, it's them, just like the lady foretold. Praise the lady." Kronos couldn't keep the smile from appearing on his face, either. I must have gone senile. Why haven't I realized sooner?" He hesitated for a moment, then bowed deeply and spoke, trying to make his voice sound solemn instead of amazed and excited. "It is our honor to meet you. We welcome you to Fallen Grace, esteemed guests." Then he straightened and added reverently, "Lady Dusk has been awaiting you for a long, long time. I'm definitely not imagining it. These people are weird." The citizens of Fallen Grace were indeed looking at Sunny funny. The frail old man in front of him was smiling with an odd mix of joy and terror, just like the rest of the elderly folks that had met them on the pier. They were simultaneously far too excited and far too scared, like a bunch of teenagers who met an idol for the first time. He could vaguely understand why they would be delighted. It seemed that Dusk had already been waiting for Sunny and Nephi's after all, which was potentially a piece of good news. But where had the awe and terror come from? Oh, maybe I shouldn't have shown up as a serpent. Sunny had thought that the river people would be accustomed to seeing creatures of all kinds, but maybe he was wrong. Still, there was a strange incongruity between the age of these people and how animated their reactions were. This whole city was strange. When Sunny and Nephi's had first seen it, both were tense and wary. They had not known what kind of welcome to expect and kept their guard up. Fallen Grace looked a lot like Weave, but also different. Painted by the crimson radiance of dusk, it floated on the waves, stretching as far as the eye could see. It was much larger than the forlorn city of the followers of Weaver, and also more developed, feeling like a place with much deeper roots. There were more island ships, most paved neatly with cobblestones and carrying graceful, picturesque buildings. The islands were connected by rope bridges, with wide canals below. Slender gondolas with intricate patterns carved into their pale wood moved through them. Unlike Weave, there were no windcatchers here. Instead, there were sails of vibrant scarlet fabric stretched between the taller buildings, making the city look like a grandiose flotilla. The buildings themselves were built from white stone and pale wood, with crimson accents added here and there to liven up their scenic facades. Fallen Grace was like a flower of pure, immaculate white drifting between the ominous crimson sky and the blood-red waters of the great river. However, it was a wilting flower. Although the beautiful buildings had been masterfully constructed, most of them were showing signs of deterioration. The newer ones did not seem nearly as picturesque, either. The rope bridges were frayed and poorly maintained. The scarlet sails might have looked magnificent once, but now their fabric had faded, its surface covered in patches and signs of makeshift repairs. Most glaringly of all, the streets of the city were too desolate. From what Sonny could tell, half of the buildings had no inhabitants, standing abandoned and empty. That felt deeply wrong. He had grown up in NQSC, after all. In a city surrounded by defensive barriers, space was deeply precious, and since there was not enough of it to go around, people like him were condemned to the outskirts. Even there, emptiness was not tolerated. Plus, the only people in sight were these old men and women. Where were the sailors? Where were the soldiers? Where were the awakened? Why was the chain breaker allowed to approach the city without being met by its guardians? Sonny found the situation very strange. Well, at least they are not attacking us. That was a concern for Nephi's and him, which was why he had dove into the water as a serpent. He stared at the old man, trying to understand why the locals seemed to be growing paler and paler with each passing moment. Then, mentally shaking his head, he sighed and said, "That's good, then. We've been anticipating meeting Lady Dusk a great deal, too." Maybe they would finally receive some answers from the last Sibyl of the estuary. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then asked bluntly, "Your city defenses seem awfully lacking. Where are the warriors? Why hasn't anyone prevented our ship from entering your waters?" The old man let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, why would they? The lady would have warned us if there was danger. Since she didn't, there must be no danger, so." He paused awkwardly and added, "Please don't worry, though. Someone will arrive shortly to escort you, esteemed guests. I am sure of it." Sonny and Nephi stared at the old man incredulously. Huh. So that was why. Fallen Grace was ruled by an oracle, and therefore its citizens lived by a completely different set of rules. Why post watchmen if any attack could be foretold in advance? It was something like that, perhaps. He wasn't sure he could really comprehend how drastic of a change such a life would be. Makes one wonder how the cities of the Sibyls fell, despite it all. Perhaps it was precisely because these people relied on the Sibyls so much. And the Sibyls, no matter how potent their prophetic powers were, could not have been omniscient, especially when there were more sinister powers at play. As Sonny was pondering these matters, there was a small commotion at the end of the pier. A dozen figures appeared, all wearing armor and wielding weapons. Their armor was white, with red sashes tied around the waist. The weapons, thankfully, were sheathed. The old men and women stepped aside to let the soldiers approach. As they did, Sonny was surprised once again. The warriors, each and every one of them, were as old as the group of people that had met them on the pier. The armor fit their shriveled figures badly, and they seemed to struggle under the weight of their weapons. Nevertheless, the old soldiers tried to maintain dignified expressions. There was fire in their eyes still. The leader of the squad, an ancient woman wearing an open helmet with a red plume, bowed deeply and then saluted with a trembling hand. "Welcome, children of Weaver. It is my honor to witness the day of your arrival. I will take you to the lady, please." The old woman made a gesture, asking them to follow. Sonny studied the old woman's armor, hesitated for a few moments, then looked at the chain breaker with doubt. He felt rather impatient to meet Dusk of Fallen Grace, but reminded himself to keep calm and take it one step at a time. "We've yet to moor our ship." The old warrior bowed again. "Everything will be taken care of." "How convenient." These ancient soldiers did not seem like much of a threat. The old woman was an awakened, but the rest were mundanes. Sonny had no doubt that he would be able to escape any ambush or trap they could potentially lure him into, and it didn't even seem like there would be a trap. Still, he didn't like the idea of leaving their only means of escaping Fallen Grace behind. That said, if Dusk had really anticipated their arrival, wouldn't she have also anticipated his reluctance? If she knew that he would be wary of a trap, wouldn't she have been able to construct a trap insidious enough to fool Sonny? Suddenly, he was full of apprehension. Damnation! Sonny had mostly been blessed by finding himself on the right side of people with prophetic powers. Now that he was about to meet an unfamiliar oracle, though, he fully realized how terrifying of an enemy one could be. His unease wasn't helped one bit by the fact that he had actually already met Dusk of fallen grace once, in a way. There were deep scars left on his psyche by the terror of Low 49. Whatever, what else can we do? Demand that she comes to meet us here on the pier. After exchanging a glance with Nephi's, Sonny shrugged and followed the group of soldiers deeper into the city. The old man who had greeted them joined, as well, which caused an irritated sigh to escape from the lips of the old woman in charge of the soldiers. "Kronos, why are you tagging along with us, kid?" The old man simply smiled. "Why, I'm the one who greeted the esteemed guests first. Surely, they'll feel better having someone familiar escort them." The leader of the soldiers shook her head and didn't say anything else. The old man, Kronos, seemed satisfied and hurried to keep up with them. "Kid, how ancient is this woman to be calling a fossil like him kid?" As Sonny was escorted through fallen grace, he couldn't help but look around with a somber expression. Everywhere they went, they were only met by old people. Ranging from elderly to ancient, the inhabitants of fallen grace all had white hair, wrinkled faces, and frail bodies of people living out the last of their twilight years. They went about their business with careful steps and looked at Sonny and Nephi's with amazed expressions. He thought that it was because of their status as guests in the city at first, but then realized that it was simply because they were young. Apart from Sonny and Nephi's, there was not a single young person in sight. "They are all riverborn." Sonny frowned, pondering the implications of this simple realization. Riverborn did not age with the passage of time. Instead, they aged by moving upstream from the place of their birth. The process was supposed to be gradual, happening over the span of generations as the city migrated into the future to allow new families to be formed. Therefore, there had to be a mix of people of different ages on the streets, just like there would be in a normal city. So what did it mean if everyone here looked old? It meant that fallen grace had migrated far upstream for a reason other than ushering in a new generation, at some point, killing the older population and thrusting everyone else into decrepit old bodies as a result. Sonny's face grew somber as he looked at Kronos one more time. It might have been that the leader of the soldiers had called him a kid not because she was incredibly ancient, but because the old man was actually a child, or a youth no older than Sonny and Nephi's at least. He hesitated for a few moments, then asked cautiously, "Kronos, say how old are you?" The old man smiled, his face turning into a labyrinth of deep wrinkles. "Oh, I am 17, my lord. I'll be 17 in a few days to be precise, but who's counting?" Sonny inhaled deeply, disturbed by the cheerful tone of that answer. Nephi seemed to have figured out the reason for why everyone in fallen grace looked so old as well. Hearing Kronos confirm it, she frowned. "Then why aren't you at the House of Youth?" As the words left her lips, the face of the old woman leading the soldiers darkened. While Kronos lingered, she answered in his stead. "It's because we lost them. We lost the entire downstream half of the city during those dark days, and if it wasn't for the lady, we would have lost the other half as well." At the mention of Dusk, an expression of deep reverence and love appeared on the faces of Kronos and the old soldiers, but there was also something else hiding behind the devotion, a hint of sorrow, fear, guilt. It was at that moment that they reached the point that should have been the center of the city. However, it was its edge instead. There was nothing but empty water where countless island ships should have been. The rope bridges leading to them had been cut, their remnants singed and floating aimlessly in the water. The closest buildings to the edge bore scars and burn marks, some of them tilting sideways or laying in piles of mostly disassembled wreckage. It was as if the whole city had been bisected into two halves, one still drifting on the crimson waves, the other long gone, lost to the unceasing pull of the past. So that's how it is. Fallen Grace had indeed migrated upstream, escaping an attack. A large part of it had been lost in the process, both in terms of island ships and people. Sunny looked away with a grim expression. Was it because of the defiled? The old woman chewed on her lips, then nodded with a strange darkness hiding in her eyes. Yes, a defiled, something like that. After that she remained silent. Soon they reached an island ship that floated a small distance away from the rest of the city. It carried a beautiful palace built of white stone, with tall columns and a spire that rose high into the scarlet sky, crowned by a pyre of pure flame. That was the source of the white spark they had seen from a distance. Crossing the expanse of crimson water, Sunny and Nephi's ascended the wide stairs leading to the gates of the palace, and were welcomed by rows of soldiers just like the ones who had escorted them here, wearing white armor with red sashes, decrepit and old. All of them bowed deeply as the small procession passed them. Finally, the gates of the temple opened in front of them. Sunny felt an old fear grip his heart. He was finally going to meet Dusk face to face, again. Soon, they were led to a grand hall filled with white marble, flowing water, and tranquil silence. There was a tall dais in the center of it, with an elegant stone throne standing on it. Dusk of Fallen Grace, the last Sibyl of the estuary, was sitting on that throne. Sunny froze. The first thing he registered was that Dusk looked young, very young. She was the first young woman they saw in Fallen Grace. She was also enthralling, with a petite figure and an exquisitely beautiful, delicate face. Her hair was like pale gold, and her stunning eyes were pure blue. Those stunning eyes looked upon the world but didn't see anything, because the beautiful young woman was blind. Of course, Sunny knew her well. Stunned, he raised a hand and asked in a trembling voice. Cassie, in front of them, sitting on the throne of Fallen Grace, was none other than Cassie, the delicate blind girl who had been their companion since the dire trial of the Forgotten Shore, and whom both Sunny and Nephi's knew better than anyone else in the world did. There could be no mistake. Cassie had not changed much since the last time Sunny had seen her. She was still the same, with golden hair and beautiful blue eyes. The soft features of her lovely face were just as he remembered them. But there was something different about her, too. There was an obvious change, of course. Unlike how she was in the Nightmare Desert, Cassie looked hale and refreshed. Gone were the feverish gauntness, dark bruises, and cracked lips. Instead, her striking beauty had bloomed once more, soft and quiet, yet making it impossible to look away. She was also wearing an unfamiliar red peplos, its thin flowing fabric draped gracefully around her supple figure and decorated with white accents. But there was also a deeper, less obvious change to her. Sunny just couldn't put his finger on what it was exactly. Most importantly, Cassie was not Dusk of Fallen Grace. Or was she? He suddenly felt a chill. Cassie. At the sound of his voice, the blind girl slowly turned her head and looked down from her throne. Even Nephi's, who rarely allowed surprise to show on her face, seemed dazed. She stared at the young woman who was, or at least looked like their friend silently, a storm of emotions hiding in her usually calm eyes. The next moment, however, tension drained from her gaze, replaced by profound relief. It was because Cassie smiled. Her wide, radiant smile set their hearts at ease. It was a smile they knew. Sunny, Neph, you are finally here. The familiar sound and cadence of her familiar voice were just as they had been before, as well. Sunny slowly exhaled and felt a strong desire to lean on something. He had been both anticipating and dreading meeting Dusk. He had also been worried sick about the members of the cohort, and especially Cassie, since she was not as fierce of a warrior as the rest of them and more vulnerable than most. Even though Sonny had been suppressing these worries, they gnawed at his soul. Now that the moment he had been dreading was replaced by an unexpected and joyous reunion, alleviating the gnawing worry, Sonny momentarily felt unbalanced. Then a million questions flooded his mind. Wait, why is Cassie here? Where is Dusk? Could Cassie have taken the role of Dusk in the nightmare? Wait, then what about Torment? Why was she sent so much further downstream than Nephi's and I were? How long has she been here? Where are the others? How? Sensing that he was on the verge of spiraling, Sonny forcefully put those questions aside. He would be able to ask them all to Cassie anyway, as soon as they were able to talk freely. As if reading his thoughts, the blind girl turned slightly and smiled at the soldiers who had escorted them into the temple. They looked at her with intense devotion, then lowered their gazes and bowed. Cassie lingered for a moment, then spoke softly. The children of Weaver are here. Please leave. There are important matters I must discuss with them alone. The old woman, leading the soldiers, looked up in protest. But my lady, it might not be safe. The blind girl chuckled. I know, child. I know more than most remember. The elderly soldier looked away in embarrassment, recalling who she was talking to. She hesitated for a moment, then bowed her head. Forgive me, my lady. I acted out of line. Cassie shook her head. No need to apologize. You only spoke out of sincere concern for me. Go and feel at ease. I also know these two. They will not harm me. She paused for a moment and added, Oh, and you, Kronos. Don't think I don't know you're hiding behind a column, brat. You go as well. An awkward cough resounded from somewhere behind, and the elderly teenager appeared in sight, scratching the back of his head. I was just enjoying the splendor of the temple. Sorry, my lady. I seem to have gotten carried away. Under Cassie's unseeing gaze, Kronos and the soldiers backed away and left the three of them alone. Or so it seemed. After the initial shock of the unexpected meeting receded, Sonny noticed two people standing in the shadows of the throne. Both of them ascended. They were an old man and an old woman, dressed in ceremonial robes. The woman wielded an unsheathed greatsword, while the man held a crimson silk cord in his hands. Tracing his gaze, Cassie let out a quiet sigh. These are my guards. Don't mind them. They are deaf and won't hear us. Sonny was strangely disturbed by these words. Why did Cassie have two deaf guards? The whole situation somehow seemed eerie. At that moment, Nephi's finally spoke. Is that old woman a teenager as well? Are all your troops composed of children? The blind girl blinked a couple of times, bewildered, then shook her head. No, she is a few 100 years old. Sonny tilted his head, stumped. What, then why did you call her a child? Cassie remained motionless for a while, then sighed deeply and lowered her head. Her voice sounded strangely hollow when she spoke, the words echoing across the white hall. It is because I've been waiting for you two for a long, long time. In the silence that followed, both Sonny and Nephi's froze. The terrible implication of what Cassie had said slowly seeped into their minds, making them realize that. At that moment, the blind girl's shoulders trembled, and she suddenly exploded into bright laughter. Oh gods, sorry, I just couldn't help myself. I really did wait for a while, about a year, I think. I imagined this day a lot, and so I just couldn't resist making this joke. Sonny and Nephi stared at her, stunned. Wah, what the hell? Who makes a joke at a moment like that? His eye twitched. Wait, did she say a year? It had been less than 3 months since Sonny and Nephi's entered the nightmare. So, the time storm did indeed mess up their perception of time, just not as direly as they had feared. Cassie, meanwhile, had gotten such a good laugh at their expense that tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. Her hands had been laying on her knees before. Now, she raised them to wipe the tears away. and when she did, Sunny heard a familiar sound. It was the rattling of chains. There were golden shackles wrapped around Cassie's slender wrists, and a golden chain connected them. Wiping off her tears, the blind girl looked up with a smile and blinked. It seemed that she had noticed their confusion. Cassie frowned a little, then touched her shackles and sighed. "Oh, you guys don't know much about the Sybils yet, right? I should explain." She lingered for a moment, then glanced briefly at the two deaf masters behind her. One held an unsheathed sword, the other a silk cord. Her expression remained calm and relaxed. "When I said that these two are my guards, I didn't mean that they guard me against danger. Instead, they are guarding the city against me." Nothing about the situation made sense. Sunny and Nephis tentatively came to terms with the fact that Cassie had replaced Dusk of fallen grace, but now they were struck by yet another revelation. Sunny did not know why the blind girl was shackled yet, but his mind had already entered a state of battle readiness, just in case. Not showing any emotions, he briefly glanced at the two deaf guards. The sword and the cord they wielded were suddenly much more sinister. If the guards were meant to protect the city from Cassie, then the sword was meant to cut her down, while the cord was meant to strangle her. How strong can these old masters be? Sunny was mentally calculating the swiftest way to kill them guards, when a sudden thought sent a chill running down his spine. His first impulse had been dictated by the deeply ingrained desire to protect Cassie, but why were the guards there in the first place? Looking at the beautiful young woman sitting on the white throne, wearing golden shackles, Sunny had to wonder if he should be thinking of a way to protect himself from her instead. She sighed. "You don't have to worry. I'm not in danger, nor do I represent danger. It's just that, well, it's a long story. I'll explain. But first." Standing up, Cassie smiled and descended from the dais. "Let me climb off that throne. It feels really odd to be looking down on you from up high." She approached them with light steps. Her delicate figure was accentuated by the vibrant red fabric of the archaic dress, which contrasted starkly against the white marble of the grand hall. Her movements were swift and graceful. Before Sunny could really decide whether he should be on guard or not, Cassie was already near. She raised her shackled hands and gave Nephis a tight hug. "I missed you. I really missed you guys a lot." She held Neph in an embrace for a few moments, then sighed and let go. A bright smile bloomed on Cassie's face. Turning to Sunny, she hesitated a bit, then gently gripped his arm with both hands. The golden chain rattled quietly. "I'm so glad that you're here." He froze, then awkwardly patted her on the hand. "What, I don't get a hug?" But then again, that was not the kind of relationship he had with Cassie. What kind of relationship did they have then? Sunny was really not sure. If he had to describe it with one word, though, it would be complicated. Still, she seemed to be sincerely happy to see him. He felt the same way, too. "We're glad to be here as well, but do you mind explaining what is going on, starting with why you are chained, please?" Cassie's smile dimmed a little. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned away. "Sure, but not here. This hall is too oppressive. Follow me." After exchanging a glance, Sunny and Nephis followed the blind girl out of the great hall and into the depths of the White Temple. The two old guards did not seem concerned by the fact that their ward was moving around freely. They simply walked behind them silently, carrying the sinister sword and the silk cord. The presence was rather ominous, but Cassie did not seem to mind. Together, the five of them entered a grand staircase, which led them to a smaller one. The blind girl was navigating the maze-like interior of the temple with practiced ease, which wasn't that surprising, considering that she must have spent a whole year here. Sometimes, she traced the marble walls with her hand, but mostly she simply counted her steps and moved by memory. Eventually, they ascended a tall tower and emerged onto an open platform. There was a massive brazier in its center, with a pyre of white flame rising high into the crimson sky from it. This was the flame they had noticed from afar, and which guided them to fallen grace. Cassie lingered in front of the brazier for a few moments, bathing in its heat. Her expression turned a little distant. After a while, she said quietly, "Right, I don't need to maintain the flame anymore." Turning around with a smile, she gestured to a small table that stood near the airy railing of the platform. "Please sit down. You must be tired after spending so long on the river." The table was brimming with fresh fruit, crystal pitchers of wine, and savory snacks. Cassie did not have to ask them twice, since Sunny and Nephi's were indeed tired after the long journey, hungry and parched. Soon the three of them were sitting around the table, enjoying the refreshments. From the height of the temple's spire, the whole of fallen grace was revealed to them, as well as the fiery expanse of the flowing water painted in a million shades of red by dusk. Looking at the surreal sight of the endless crimson river, Sunny couldn't help but notice how damaged and incomplete the city looked. It was indeed as though it had been cut in half, with many of the island ships either missing or taking a position in the flotilla that was clearly not meant for them. Taking a sip of fragrant red wine, Cassie sighed and turned to face fallen Grace as well. She was holding the glass with both hands, careful not to let the golden chain get in the way. Eventually, she said, "I entered the nightmare around a year ago. It was very disorienting, as you must have experienced yourself. Especially once I realized that I had taken the place of Dusk, the Sibyl of fallen grace. Dusk, I don't know how powerful she was exactly, but she must have been at least a transcendent, while I am not." Sunny nodded somberly and added in a low voice, "The last Sibyl." The blind girl turned to him with a strange, fragile smile. "Yes, the last, although I wasn't so at the start." Nephi's frowned, feeling a dark undertone in Cassie's voice. "Wasn't so? What do you mean?" Cassie remained silent for a few moments, her face turning solemn. Then she said, "The Sibyls were oracles once. The revelations they received came from the gods, but then the gods grew silent, and one after another the Sibyls turned to another source of knowledge, the estuary. What revelations do you think they received from there?" Sunny suddenly paled. "Wait, no way." The runes describing the shroud of graceless dusk resurfaced in his memory. There they found solace, safety, and shelter. In time, the voices of the gods grew silent one after another, leaving behind only a vast and dreadful silence. That was how the Sibyls embraced the estuary, and that was how they fell. He looked at Cassie somberly and said, his voice slightly hoarse, "The defilement." The blind girl nodded sadly. "Yes, the defilement spread from the estuary, consuming Verge, the city of the Seekers. And from there, the defiled slowly moved upstream, threatening to devour all other settlements on the great river. The Sibyls and their people waged a war against them for a long time. Eventually, most of their cities fell, some fell to the defiled, but not all." Her beautiful face looked forlorn for a moment. Cassie sighed. The Sibyls were truly formidable at the height of their power. It was no coincidence that they had managed to guide their people through the horrors of the Doom War and enter the tomb of Ariel unharmed. Even the defiled found it difficult to conquer the cities reigned by the Sibyls. How would they not, if the defenders knew the secrets of the future? She paused for a moment and took a small sip of the wine. But the very thing that gave the Sibyls power ended up becoming their undoing. The most stalwart cities, they fell to the Sibyls themselves, because they were corrupted by the glimpses of the estuary and succumbed to the defilement, letting the rot spread from within. The blind girl sighed again, then shook her head. "A year ago there were 3 Sibyls in fallen grace. One was already defiled and entombed in her temple. Of the other 2, Dusk was the junior. The senior Sibyl, She had hidden the signs of corruption from everyone until it was too late. The day she lost control was the day I took Dusk's place. She lingered for a moment and gestured to the city below. This is what I managed to preserve. I was able to rally the defenders of fallen grace and slay the defiled Sibyl. But by then, much of the city had already been lost. Much worse, the seals containing the other defiled had been broken, and she was a much more terrifying creature than the other one. All I could do was abandon the contested island ships and evacuate the remaining ones as far upstream as I could. Cassie smiled faintly and raised her hands, allowing the golden chain to ring. Hence these shackles, and the deaf guards. I am the ruler of this city, but at the same time I am a threat to it, or so the river people think, since they don't know that I am not truly Dusk. I was afraid that my own affinity to revelations would place me in the same danger the Sibyls had been exposed to, but funnily enough, I turned out to be immune to it. Can you guess why? Sunny and Nephi's looked at her silently, not knowing what to answer. Sunny was a bit confused. I get why Nephi's is not in danger of becoming defiled. Her soul is incorruptible, but how can Cassie be immune as well? He shook his head. I'm not sure. She chuckled, then pointed to herself. It's because I'm blind. Her beautiful blue eyes gazed upon the world unseeing. Cassie sighed softly. Whatever it is that the Sibyls saw in their visions of the estuary I can't see. That is why the truth of the estuary can't corrupt me, or at least can't corrupt me in the same way it corrupted the Sibyls. In the visions I had before entering the tomb of Ariel, I usually had sight. But ever since coming here, all I see is darkness. Who knew it would be a blessing? She smiled and moved her hand slightly, allowing the golden chain to fall back onto her lap. Anyway, I knew that you would arrive eventually, but I did not know how long it would take. So, I remained in fallen grace and defended the city from the attacks of the defiled. It was a long year. What took you so long? Nephi's leaned forward and grasped Cassie's hand. White sparks glinted in her calm gray eyes. You did well, Cass. I'm sorry. We entered the nightmare much further upstream, and it took us a long time to travel into the past. We encountered a time storm on the way, which is why, while a year has passed for you, it was only a few months to us. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then added, But you must have known that already, right? It was thanks to you that Anik knew to meet us and point us in the direction of fallen grace. A strange expression appeared on Cassie's face. He frowned, confused by her reaction. What's wrong? The blind girl hesitated. I'm sorry, but who is Anik? And what do you mean she knew to guide you to fallen grace? I'm afraid I don't understand. Sunny and Nephi's exchanged a somber look. After a moment of silence, she asked carefully, Was it not you who sent a dream message to the priestess of Weave, to warn her of our arrival? Cassie simply shook her head. Send a dream message. I don't even know how to do something like that, let alone who the priestess of Weave is. I also wouldn't have known where you were. Are you saying that there was someone who did? Sunny suddenly felt an ominous premonition. He was somewhat convinced that it was Dusk who had sent Anik instructions to meet them and guide them to fallen grace. Now that he knew that Cassie had taken the place of the last Sibyl, though, and she was not the mysterious being pulling the strings of the nightmare from behind the scenes. There was a small possibility, of course, that Dusk had arranged everything before being erased from existence by Cassie's arrival. But it was infinitely small, had the last Sibyl even existed in the nightmare. Why would the spell extend its timeline beyond the point where the challengers entered? And even if it had, what were the chances that Dusk not only knew of her nature as a phantom conjured by the spell, but also everything about the challengers and their task? Close to zero. However, if not Dusk or Cassie, then who could have possessed both a deep knowledge of the future and enough insight to manipulate it? Sunny gritted his teeth, disturbed. Not only did they know when and where we would enter the nightmare, but also a great deal more. It was how we ended up finding the ship, the chain breaker, and making it all the way here. Cassie seemed stunned. The chain breaker. She remained silent for a while, then shivered and said, her voice glum. Well then, maybe it was torment. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.